Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Parametric Symbols in UniversalPlantViewer. My name is Daniel Dolinsky and I'm the lead business process architect at CA Experts. Today's webinar will take about 30 minutes, so we'll have a 25-minute demo, and at the end we will have about 5 minutes questions and answers. So today's agenda is quite short. We will basically have a live demo, and I just want to discuss the prerequisites for this feature. So you need to have UniversalPlantViewer with the sketching module activated and CA Experts 3D Symbol Designer to create the symbols. So 3D Symbol Designer is around for more than 15 years now and was originally developed to create 3D symbols for Smart 3D. So you can reuse the old symbols and add a little bit of additional features to them. So you can reuse them in UniversalPlantViewer, but you can also create these additional symbols from scratch, so you don't use them for Smart 3D, just for UniversalPlantViewer. So let's start with the live demo. So I will just go to UniversalPlantViewer, and in here we have this Files menu, where you can add additional sketches when the sketch module is available there. So I create a new sketch via the Files menu, and down here there is the Catalog tab, and in here I can add items from this catalog. So we've got a standard catalog coming with UniversalPlantViewer, and today I want to show you how to use these symbols and how to create them in 3D Symbol Designer. So let's see what we have here in the catalog. I will just pick some examples from the catalog to show you the functionality in here. So let's start with a very big symbol, a cooling tower. So that's the cooling tower symbol, and you see these tiny white bubbles that are handles that I can use to resize the symbol. So I can completely reshape this cooling tower. I can, for example, also change the height. So I would just use this bubble here on top. And of course, also these parameters that get modified by the bubbles are available for direct modifications via the Attributes tab. So in here we've got the symbol attributes. So you can see that currently we have these settings here, and for example, when I move this bubble up and down, it's modifying the tower height value over here. So you can also enter values using this graphical user interface over here. So you don't need the bubbles, but sometimes they are really handy if you want to just sketch a little bit around. So that's the cooling tower. As you can see, we can recalculate the freeform in real time, and that will also work on a mobile phone. So you could, for example, use this feature on your iPad and just press the bubbles, move them around, and it would resize this cooling tower. Next one would be the wall, where we have a little hole in the wall. So that's the starting wall thickness here. So let's just pick this one and zoom in a little bit. So as you can see, we have these bubbles that I can use to modify the length and the height, even the thickness of the wall. And I can move this window around or resize it. Next example. Here in equipment, let's just pick this cabinet. So that could be anything, for example, just a cupboard or a container, because you can resize this box. So that's more a container shape now. You can even open and close the doors. Next symbol would be just a little equipment. So here we have this pump, so we can resize it with these bubbles. Another task here could be hangers and supports. So let's just place a simple pipe clamp. Again, just 2 bubbles to rotate the pipe clamp and to resize it. Then we have markup symbols. A very simple one, this arrow could be used to highlight objects here in 3D. So you can move the arrow around and resize it. Then we have this simple worker example here, which is quite useful to test if, for example, a worker could reach a pipeline or a valve. So what we have here is one handle to move the arm and a second one where we try to reach an object. Same here for the other one. So we can also use the right arm to test things using this simple worker object. Then in structural, we have, for example, a handrail. So this is a very simple one. I just modify the length and I get a longer handrail here. We have a ladder. As soon as I modify the height, it starts adding the cages at a certain height. And I can also switch between the 500 millimeters and the 600 millimeters variant of the ladder. Then we have, for example, modular scaffolding. And we also have scaffolding with a gate. So we can, of course, move this. So here I can define the length. And the position of this gate plus the height of the gate. And the width, of course. We have also staircases and so on. I will just skip them. So finally, there is this transportation folder, and let's just place a classical German crane here, the Liebherr LTM 1750. So I can move it around, and I can use the bubbles to rotate the crane. To move this upwards. I can also modify the position of the hook. And I can even move these additional feet out of the crane. So that's basically what you can do in here. You can place the object and they come out of this catalog. So how can you create the catalog? So first of all, you need to have a little text file where you can add the additional objects. So that gets placed in the data folder. So that's just my standard project here for UPV. And in here, you need to place this little text file. So that's basically including all the items for the catalog. So we have architectural items here. So that was the cooling tower example, or for example, the arrow and the simple worker. We need this file because on mobile phones, the operating system usually doesn't allow UPV to scan a folder. Otherwise, it would be very easy. We would just scan the catalog folder. So we need this little text file that tells UPV where to look for these symbols. So that is needed. And of course, you need to have the symbols. So they are all stored here in the catalog folder. So in here, as you can see, we have these folders. And for example, if we look at the equipment folder, you can see we have an Excel file here for this little cupboard I've shown you, and a little PNG file. So that's the preview icon in UniversalPlantViewer, and that's the 3D Symbol Designer file. So let's see how we can create these files in 3D Symbol Designer. I've seen that on the list of attendees, there are many users of 3D Symbol Designer. So you might already know the graphical user interface of 3D Symbol Designer. So that's the tool that is usually used to create the symbols for Smart 3D. So you have a graphical user interface where you can place bodies, ports and connectors, and parameters to create a parametric symbol for Smart 3D. And you can reuse these project files now for UPV, and you can add additional functionality in here in 3D Symbol Designer. So the only additional buttons are these two buttons here, one for the angle and one for the length. So these buttons can be used to add additional functionality to your symbol. So they are still compatible with the export to Smart 3D. So it's not destroying or blocking your old symbol, it's just adding additional functionality. Just a little example, I think that the 3D Symbol Designer users would of course know this, just for all the users that have not seen 3D Symbol Designer and come from the UPV world. So let's just add a box in here. So it places this three-dimensional box also in the tree view over here. And then I can add parameters, for example, to modify here the length. So I can just drag and drop my parameters onto these values here for the box. So it's now copying the parameters from this list of variants down here. So I could have, for example, a 500 millimeters in the first and 1200 millimeters in the second column here. And it's now resizing this object according to these values, and I can add additional variants. So for example, another variant could be 800 millimeters and 1000 millimeters. So let's zoom out a little bit. So we have the two variants now of this box. So I could call them box A and box B. So that's the workflow that you would usually use in 3D Symbol Designer to create a symbol for Smart 3D. So we already have the Smart 3D mapping down here. Now for UniversalPlantViewer, we can completely ignore this mapping for Smart 3D. If it's there, it's fine. So it doesn't block the symbol. It's fine if it's also with a red highlight. For UniversalPlantViewer, you would just add one additional row in here. And you name this variant UniversalPlantViewer. And as you can see, it also gets the yellow highlight that we have for Smart Plant 3D down here. And now we have the parameter mapping in here. So that could be box height, for example. So that is what is showing up in UniversalPlantViewer in the attributes list. So that's how the mapping works. So you just build up the symbol according to the 3D Symbol Designer documentation, and you add this extra row here to map the parameters. And then you can use these features here to add handles that actually define the height and the width. So let's see how this works with this little cabinet example. So I will just open up the Excel file for the cabinet. So in here we have some items that define the geometry. So just the boxes for the top, the bottom, the doors, and so on. And as you can see, we have 2 angular handles here and 3 linear handles. So let's see what the first handle does. So it's created using the button up here. And in here, we can define the minimum and the maximum angle and which parameter to set. So I can set in this formula here which parameter should be modified by this handle. So here it's the par angle 1, which maps to the door 1 angle. If we look at the angular handle 2, we are mapping here to par angle 2, so it's to the mapping to the door 2 angle. So that are the angular handles. We have a rotation, a translation in here. So actually, the bubble gets placed here at the translation position, and then you can add additional rotations. So it's basically defining the axis of the rotation here using Euler angles. So the 3D symbol designer users will already recognize this scheme because it's the same that we use for all the objects here. Then regarding these linear handles, here we can specify a length by dragging and dropping this bubble. So here we have a minimum length of 300 millimeters defined, a maximum length of infinity, and it's using the parameter par width. So it's actually setting what is currently here 700 millimeters just by this handle. So for the current users of 3D Symbol Designer, you just need to remember that you have to add this additional row here for the mapping. And you can use, if you like, these buttons here to create the bubbles. They are not necessary, but for sketching, I think it's very useful to have them in here. And basically that's all. So you just save the symbol. So you have this Excel file, you place it in the folder, you create a little screenshot for the icon, and you place the name of the Excel file in the text file. And there you go. Then it's available in the catalog of UniversalPlantViewer. So how to do these special features? So if we look back to our symbols here, I think now it's clear how you would build up a symbol like this. It's just resizing shapes here using the handles and turning around the crane using the handles. But you have also seen that we have examples where I can modify the length of the scaffolding, and it's adding extra items in here. Same, for example, with the ladder. So I increased the height of the ladder, and it was adding the cage starting at a certain height. So let's see how this works. In 3D Symbol Designer, we have the option to create a so-called for loop. So it's this button up here. So this for loop creates copies of objects. So let's just place, for example, a cylinder. So I can now drag and drop this cylinder into the geometry node of the for loop. And now it's getting copied exactly once, because this is starting at 0 and it's ending at 0. So let's create 3 copies. So I'm just counting from 0 to 2. So now I've got 3 copies of the cylinder, but all at the same place. So I can go to this translation node here to modify the location. So let's just put them here. So I will start with geometry dot for loop 1 times, for example, 1.5 meters in this formula. And now it's placing the first one here at 0, the next one at 1.5, and the next one at 3 meters. So we have now a cylinder placement defined by this for loop. So let's just assume it's 3. Then I get 4 copies. And if it's just 1, I get 2 copies. And of course, I can make this parameter 2 dependent on input parameters. For example, the height of a ladder. So this defines these copies, but it doesn't explain how to switch on and switch off objects. And that's done using the visible node over here. So all the geometry objects have this visibility node, and it defines if the object is switched on or switched off regarding the display of the object. So as soon as the formula in here has a value of 0, the object will disappear. So here in 3D Symbol Designer, you get the black highlight to show that this will not show up afterwards in Universal Plant Viewer. So you can just use this visible node, create a formula to switch on and switch off the objects. So for example, you define a formula that is dependent on the height of the symbol, and starting at a certain height, you switch on the objects that are needed to create the graphical representation of the cage. So basically that's it regarding the functionality you would need in here to create these symbols. So the usual time it takes to create these symbols is definitely less than a day. So if we look at this collection over here, so a pump like this is usually half an hour, or the arrow would also be just half an hour to get created in 3D Symbol Designer. Also here for the wall, perhaps 1 hour. More complex items like this could be half a day for scaffolding objects like this. And also here for the crane, we are talking about several hours. But for example, the cooling tower, that's probably just half an hour because it's just one rotational solid here on top and a cylinder at the bottom. So it does not take long to create these objects, and you can use them here then in UPV, also on site on the mobile devices. And you can, of course, also use the export functionality in UPV drawings and so on. So that's available in UPV. So you can have screenshots, use the API. So it's we are creating real catalog objects using 3D Symbol Designer.